case has captured so many people's attention, and they're, hey, Jack. And these details really are the things that people were clamoring for, all during the while the gag order was in place. And now that gag order has been lifted, and we're getting things just dripping out. And so, again, we've got this stuff, and we want to start. Let's start with the roommates, because you just heard that sound by bumping in. We heard yesterday from Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funke. Bethany wasn't there, but her statement was read by a friend. And we're going to start right now with an interview that the Moscow Police Department did with Bethany. And it starts basically with her rendition of what happened. She says she woke up after falling asleep, and she heard what she felt was a firecracker go off, and she thought she saw a sparkler going off through a crack under a door. She stated she didn't know what happened, and either Bethany called Dylan or Dylan called Bethany. This is what she told police. And Dylan stated that she thought she had just seen someone dressed in all black in the house. And of course, that was in part of the probable cause, right? So we knew that part of the equation. She saw this guy and said the bushy hairs, but this is more of the interview. Bethany then said that Xana had been wearing all black, so Dylan responded by saying she thought that he had a ski mask on. So they're going back and forth, Dylan and Bethany, and they're obviously concerned, and they would also later say that they were drunk at the time. Bethany said she didn't really know what to say, and what Dylan said. Bethany then admitted both her and Dylan got scared very easily. She went on to, really talk about how the other roommates would make fun of her for getting scared. She even thought maybe one of Ethan's frat brothers could have been playing a joke on her because she was scared easily. And Bethany told Dylan, come down to her room, and Dylan did just that, ran down to her room. Jack, and Kelly, this, you think about the moment after the investigators show up, the first responding officers, and they're confronted with these 4 bodies. And then you have these roommates, these hysterical roommates, young college kids. These interviews were done right at that juncture, and these are basically the first these are the first interviews done with these surviving roommates. Jack, what do you take from all of this? Because let's face it, a lot of people said, well, why did they wait to call till the next day at noon? This kind of tells the story, does it not, from their perspective?
No, well, there's no question, Ted. When we realize, for lack of a better word, the bedlam of something like this, we need to understand what any crime scene has the potential of being and the impact that it can have on somebody. But let's go much broader than that for a second. Let's realize we're talking about a homicide, a quadruple homicide, and what it means. I think what we're starting to see is a whole series of documents that show the bigger picture. And remember, when we watched these together on the back end of a case, this is after years of effort by police officers and detectives and forensic analysts and doctors and EMTs and everybody else in the room. And then they go to the lawyers. And now we have a prosecution team who is trying to clean something up so they can introduce a clean, simple set of narratives to a jury of 12. But that's not what we have, and that's not what we ever have. And what this highlights, Ted, is that this is a complex, confusing, almost impossible circumstance. So just one simple example of that. We sometimes will see a crime scene and you imagine what a body might look like. And I don't mean to get too graphic, but we have to understand, especially with this kind of a murder, the amount of blood that is present is beyond something that a normal person can even contemplate. Now put somebody who has no experience with this into that mix and realize what it does. This creates a level of not just trauma, but a level of confusion and sometimes odd reactions. And you realize this is what the police have to walk into. They have to parse it out, they have to block it off and protect the crime scene, but they want to get to these victims and these witnesses as fast as they can because it might be high speed. They may need to find something immediately, or it might be a 2 or 3 year process. This is just a smidgen of what we're talking about here.
You know, let's take another look at more of what Bethany Funke told the police. So in this part, she is explaining why she and Dylan did not call for help when they had heard some noises. So Bethany and Dylan, they did not call 911 at the time because Bethany thought Dylan was imagining what she was talking about. And then Bethany stated, both her and Dylan, that they were both still drunk. And Ted, you mentioned that. And so, you know, these are young kids. They're out partying. They're doing what they normally do, having fun. And they also said that they had been groggy. And so, again, the confusion.
Yeah, and keep in mind, this was a football weekend, too. You know, this was a big football game that week, that day.
Yeah.
And, you know, think about a college campus on football Saturday. This is the aftermath. Now they're in bed, at home, and still drunk. And that, to me, is interesting. When you put it into context, yeah, they were second guessing what they thought they might have been hearing and seeing, which makes sense because it's so off the wall.
Yeah.
We also need to remember, we assume sort of on the back end what somebody should have done. Sometimes we see the arguments for conspiracies of various things, and you think, why didn't they do something? Or why I would have done something. Well, that's all of us looking back. Whereas if you're somebody in the circumstances and you hear something upstairs, you might simply say, that's strange, that's weird, or that person's a scaredy cat. Instead of actually saying, this was unusual, and therefore we should go and investigate. We should pick up the phone and call 911. Sometimes what we get here is, rather than a very broad view and scope, it's just a myopic look at something we know very little about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really easy to always look at these situations and think, I would have done it this way. But when you are in that situation, I mean, you have no idea until you are in a situation like that, which nobody actually will ever probably be in another situation like that, what you would have done.
Yeah. Let's keep going with that. She says they're both drunk and both groggy. Bethany then, this is the police officer writing this. Bethany told me prior to hearing the firecracker, she thought she heard Murphy. Murphy's the dog. Remember, that's Kaylee Gonzalez's dog, Murphy, bark. She also heard what she thought was the beer pong table. Again, college kids living in a house, beer pong table moving and cups falling. It says cops, but they mean cups. The beer pong table was located in the living room, which is above Bethany's room. Bethany stated that she wasn't sure what the sequence of events were for sure, but she knows she heard Murphy bark, the beer pong table, and then the firecracker-type noise first before she called Dylan to see if she had heard the same thing. So again, this is the brain fog of the next morning after a horror movie scenario for a college kid that had been, you know, being a college kid the night before. And for cops, let's face it, they're walking into 4 dead bodies in Moscow, Idaho, where, you know, theft and burglary and maybe some DV is their biggest call of the year. And here now we have 4 dead bodies and there's no obvious suspect. Jack, getting actual information out of these kids, you could see how difficult it was because they're in shock.
No, there's no question, Ted. And in the perfect world, when you first heard the cups drop, well, should you have done something? Would we have done something? Then you all of a sudden, you hear the firecracker or you hear the dog bark. Is 1 enough? Is 2 enough? Is 3 enough? Now let's add the brain fog into it, right? I mean, these are college students. I recall, Ted, you and I spending a lot of time together talking about this when I'm in Atlanta, when you were working on that documentary. And I think about what it is to be a college student and to be in this space. And nobody sees this coming. Nobody, nowhere sees this coming. And imagine being a college student where you could actually see more than that, hear more than that. And because it's such a, for lack of a better description, a non sequitur, that it comes from nowhere, that there's no way to link it to something logical and say, this is what that is. And so that delay is actually far more reasonable than I think people looking at it from the back end can imagine, because it just makes no sense. There's no way to see this and assume some nefarious act had taken place, or 4 nefarious acts had taken place, so you call 911 immediately. And it really helps to explain that delay.
I mean,
but also, right, but it also does one other thing.
I mean, don't we all do
what
that?
It also does is,
Jack, don't we all hear noises? You know, don't we all hear noises from time to time? You're sitting there and you're groggy, sometimes a little hungover, you know, but you're sitting in bed or something, you hear something, and there's one little part of your brain is, there's something bad happened, but you go back to bed, right? Well, you just go back to sleep, and guess what? It was nothing the next morning. That's what they felt, likely.
And if I'm the only one in the house, right? If I'm the only one in the house and I hear that, something's wrong. But I'm not the only one in the house. There's multiple people out there, so you don't know if it's just somebody else who got up also groggy and bumped into the beer pong table. That's the difference, and you just don't know.
Let's go with more from what Bethany Funke told the police. So let's take a look at some of the other documents here. So Bethany told me she tried calling Xana and Maddie at 4:21 and then tried calling Ethan at 4:22. Bethany stated she tried calling Maddie, Kaylee, and Xana several more times once Dylan got into her room. So again, we're taking a look at these newly released documents that were released after Brian Kohberger was sentenced yesterday. So Jack, that's just another excerpt from some of these documents. So we can talk about that, but also just in the conversation we were having, one of the things that struck me was when those 911 calls were released and we heard the 911 operator saying to the kids, only one person at a time talk. I can't hear all of you. I want only one person at a time to talk. And hearing that for the first time, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, these kids, they had no idea what was going on, and they're all wanting to talk to tell the operator to get there as quickly as possible. It was like I felt so bad for what they were going through, and then somebody of authority telling them, one person at a time talk, only one person at a time.
You realize again the bedlam. I come back to the word, right? And you can't help but hear that. I think about countless 911 calls that I have heard over 30 years as a former prosecutor and as a defense attorney, and what they all mean. And sometimes what you're having to do as a 911 operator is you're having to, oddly, calm people down. You're actually having to slow them down because they're coming at this phone call at 100 miles an hour. And what you're saying is, you need to slow down, and I need just one of you because I'm trying to do something very specific and intentional. And so you will actually hear aggressive 911 calls, even though they're doing their best to try to fix this. But if we can look back at that last document where he said at 4:22 in the morning, you realize you're starting to see just how deeply these officers were asking questions. So these are follow-ups, right? When you say, tell me what happened, and you're going back saying, at 4:21, I did this. This is how deep these officers are starting to go. And they're going fast because you're going big picture, but you're also going small because you don't know what the important information is when you first step into a crime scene as an officer. It may be the big pieces, it may be the small ones. We don't know if the people who were the victims or the perpetrators are still there. We don't know anything until we start acquiring that information. And these officers have to walk in and start picking all of it as fast as they can.